And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
Welcome to Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I am Russell Brown. Joining me, as always, on a Tuesday night, CP Christian Page. CP, how we doing, man?
I'm doing well, and I'm ecstatic because you have released your top 40 big board, and soon to come you'll release, your top 160? And so that'll be up in sometime before the draft. So definitely looking forward to it. And I was joking with you, Russ, before we hit record that I kind of agree with a lot of stuff. So, we can probably just end the show, 15 seconds in, and we'll be good to go. But, no, I'm just going to run down and ask you a few questions. Just looking over your top 5, Quinnen Williams, Nick Bosa, Ed Oliver, Josh Allen, Jonah Williams. Kind of similar to the consensus. I know Ed Oliver at 3 before the college football season. That seemed pretty accurate, but I know there's been a lot of rumors about position and where he's going to play and how he fits. But I guess we can start at Jonah Williams at 5. Speaking of a guy that there's a lot of talk about, is he a guard? Is he a right tackle? Is he a left tackle? To me and to you, he's just a darn good football player. What are your thoughts on the Alabama tackle?
I like Jonah Williams a lot. I'm not going to lie. I think he has got just untapped potential still. And I know that sounds weird, but the guy has, over 10-inch hands. His arms checked in just under 34 inches. And I just like how smooth he is. And it kind of at times, and I don't like to use pro comps. Everybody knows that. But kind of reminds me a little bit of like Joe Thomas out of Wisconsin. And he met with the New York Jets today, and I'm a little bit interested, and that's on Tuesday here as we record this. He's met with the New York Jets, and I'm a little bit interested by that because I think that's a team that really needs help on the offensive line, and they've talked about trading down. And if they trade down and they're able to get Jonah Williams, I think that's phenomenal. But for Jonah Williams, the prospect, I just think he's incredibly clean, very technically sound, and that was something that really stood out to me back in October, November when I was watching him, and it was like, this is the cleanest offensive tackle in the draft. And I know he struggled a little bit against Clemson, but he was playing against Clelin Ferrell. He's not going to play against every edge rusher the size of Clelin Ferrell. Clelin Ferrell's got unreal athletic ability and unreal length for that position, and he's got that blend of speed and power to him. And I think he's one of the more pro-ready edge rushers in this class. I think he's a pretty safe pick in the teens somewhere. And so for him to struggle a little bit there against Clemson, it's understandable, especially just against that defensive line. That was the best defensive line he played against all year. But when he's playing against, the Montez Sweats of the world, the Jeff Simmons of the world, he did a very good job holding his own. And I'm just, I'm very pleased with the development of him. But I still think there's some potential that could still be untapped, if you will. And I think just with his ability in the run game, his ability as a pass blocker, I think he's going to consistently get better, especially in the NFL. I like him at left tackle. Maybe the ceiling's a little bit higher at guard, but I'm playing him at left tackle before I do anything else, kind of similar to Deion Dawkins when he came out of Temple.
Yeah, face it. If you need offensive line help, Jonah Williams is your guy. He's not going to be a liability whatsoever. So I'm looking, in your top 10, 6 of the top 10 guys are defensive players. We knew that it's a very heavy defensive class. But the 4 non-defensive players, there's a position there that we're not used to seeing that often in the top 10, and that's the tight end position.
Mm-hmm.
TJ Hawkinson out of Iowa. Oh, yeah, and then there's 2 tight ends in the top 15 or top 13, and they're both from Iowa. I know it's kind of understood that these are the 2 consensus tight ends, and I know Irv Smith Jr. out of Alabama is another guy that a lot of people really like. But it's incredible to have two guys from the same school and then two tight ends in the top 13. Even though, again, it's understood that they're the top guys, what do you like about both of these guys, starting with Hawkinson first?
Well, Hawkinson, I just think, is one of the safest picks in this draft. I know that's been used a lot on him, but I think it's very accurate. I think his ability to help in the run game right away is important. I think he's a very good run blocker. You see that on tape every single time, and I love that from tight ends. That was something that really intrigued me with Ian Thomas just from the Senior Bowl last year. His willingness.
That's your boy. You love Ian Thomas.
Yep, and that was a guy that had that willingness. If you have that willingness to go the extra mile and do the dirty work, I'm all for it. And I'm for guys that are just good football players. And he's a good football player. He's a good pass catcher. He secures the ball away from his body. He can bring it in. I like his route running ability. He's not as athletic as Noah Fant, or maybe not as natural as a receiver, if that makes sense, as Noah Fant. But I just think as far as the complete package of tight ends, he's the most complete package of a tight end we've seen in a while. And Noah Fant's not that far behind. So I like this tight end class a lot. And I think both guys have the potential to be top 15 picks in this draft.
That was my next question, but you just answered it. Like, the realistic expectation, obviously big boards never shake out, and they're not really supposed to shake out based on, quarterbacks and certain needs. They're not going to shake out whether, pick one is going to be line up, and the top 10 picks will line up with the top 10, or the top 10 players will line up with the top 10 picks. But do you think there's a realistic opportunity or possibility that both these guys go in the top 15?
I think so. I think I was going to say Chase Sternberger, because I was seeing the gap between Irv Smith and my next tight end, which is I'll answer that in a moment. But Hawkinson, I think, is a really good fit for Jacksonville at 7. I know there's some strong consideration for them to maybe just go best defensive player on the board, or maybe an offensive lineman like a Jawan Taylor, or maybe they consider an Andre Dillard or Jonah Williams or something of that sort. But I think Hawkinson's very much in play. Nick Foles is there. You need to get him weapons. You need to make sure that investment works out. And if that's going to be the case, you don't really have a true number one receiver there. You have Leonard Fournette. You want to continue to invest in the run game. Well, Hawkinson can help you in the run game, but also as a pass catcher and be a number one target for Nick Foles. We've seen it with Gronkowski for Tom Brady for many years, and I'm not saying that's who he's going to be, but you saw that for a long time. You saw Vernon Davis in San Francisco. He was a very good tight end. You see it now with George Kittle in San Francisco, and you saw it with Antonio Gates as well with the Chargers. Zach Ertz is getting his own every single week for Philly. And with DeFilippo there coming from Philly and probably going to insert some of the concepts and schemes to his offense with Nick Foles, I'm assuming it's going to have a tight end heavily regarded into it. So I think Hawkinson makes a lot of sense for 7. I've been saying that for a while. And then Noah Fant. I mean, I think he could go in a variety of spots. I think 12 to Green Bay makes a lot of sense. He'd be really a perfect fit behind Jimmy Graham for a year, and I think that would be a really good duo of tight ends. Also, I think this is a team that maybe doesn't get talked about enough because they have Jordan Reed, but I like Washington as well to maybe consider another tight end. Jordan Reed's been struggling with staying healthy, and if you bring in a guy like Noah Fant, maybe, just maybe, you could move on from somebody like Jordan Reed, and maybe you do trade him to somebody like New England and you get a draft pick out of it. But as long as you don't have to worry about the injury problems anymore, that could very much be on the table. But also Cincinnati. They have Tyler Eifert, and that's pretty much it. They lost Tyler Kroft. So I think there's plenty of teams, and you could also add the Detroit Lions in the mix as well at 8. I know they signed Jesse James, but that's not a really expensive deal. Jesse James hasn't been the most productive tight end in his career. He's not really had the opportunity to. And just because they signed a tight end doesn't necessarily mean they won't draft one. When they drafted Eric Ebron, they re-signed Brandon Pettigrew to a 4-year deal just a few weeks before that. So we've seen them do this before. And if they're considering trading back, well, they could trade back to 13, 14, somewhere along those lines. And then we could see them take a tight end like a Noah Fant or TJ Hawkinson if either one of them were on the board.
I'm not in love with the tight end class as much as you are, but I like it. And
yeah.
Even if you don't, of course, like we're saying, with the first 10 to 15 picks, you have to kind of capitalize on, quarterback opportunity or some of these next generational defensive players. But I think we both can agree on early in the second round and possibly somewhere around round 3, you still have guys that I think you could pretty much plug and play. May take a little more grooming outside of these Iowa duos and possibly Irv Smith, but I think the tight end class is deep enough where you can kind of plug and play and then go forward there. One of my favorite players in the entirety of the draft, I've been saying it for since the beginning of the season, Byron Murphy, cornerback from Washington, checks in at number 9 on your big board.
Mm-hmm.
We all know what he's capable of. Super athletic. I think he's plenty aware. He's still a little raw in some areas, but he's still young. I think there's plenty of potential there. The question I have for you, and correct me if I'm wrong, DeAndre Baker of Georgia was your CB1 at some point during the season. What changed for Byron Murphy to move into the top 10, and then DeAndre Baker is all the way at 32?
Well, Byron Murphy was somebody I was not really on my radar. I mean, in the summertime, kind of had an idea of who he was, but I was not expecting the type of year that he had. And then when you watch him against Utah, I just absolutely fell in love with the way he played in that game. And he single-handedly won them that football game. And I'm like, with a team that has Myles Gaskin, a team that has Aaron Fuller, I know Jake Browning's not that great, but you have Jake Browning, you have Drew Sample on offense. And then just some of the defensive talent that they have. Ben Burke-Irvin, you've got Greg Gaines in the middle, and they've got, I want to say his name's Miles Bryant, another defensive back that we'll be talking about next year out of Washington. You have Byron Murphy, though, single-handedly winning them this football game, and his ability to just click, close, and get to the football is just – it was insane to me. And it was something that I hadn't seen out of a defensive back in this class. DeAndre Baker, the biggest thing that always worried me was the long speed. And for him to be around 4.58, 4.6, it really scared me. Baker, I love his ability in and out of zone and man coverage. I think he can do a magnitude of things. He can run multiple different schemes for your defense. I think he's really good in press situations. But if he gets beat, can he recover? And I don't know if he can, and that's something that worries me a little bit, and that's why he dropped down, just the athletic testing, and that's why I wait so long to really dive into defensive backs, especially safeties and things like that, because I like to see where they test, and I learned my lesson a few years back with Tease Tabor, who I had pounded the table for as the best corner in the draft, and he comes out, he goes in the second round, he runs like a 4.65, and he's just not very good. And it goes to show. And I'm worried about that with Baker a little bit. Obviously, he didn't run a 4.65, but that's something that worries me. But Byron Murphy, 4.55 is a fine time, 36.5-inch vertical. I think this is a guy that, despite some of the size criticism, I guess you could say, at 5'11", 190, I think he fits the mold. And, maybe not so much Marshawn Lattimore. I don't like him as much as Lattimore, but I like him more than I liked Garyon Conley when he came out of Ohio State, and they're similar in size as well. So just Murphy at 9, I think it felt right to put him in there, especially off of tape grade and everything else. And I fell in love with this tape. He's one of my favorite players in the class, and it was hard to not have him at 9. And again, with Baker, if he would have tested a little bit better, and if some of the controversy off the field is, things that I was listening to on some other podcasts and reading up on, is that he's got some off-the-field concerns as far as work ethic and things like that. So if you're hearing that now, it could come a little bit into the surface when he gets to the NFL level. So that was something that worried me a little bit. So I think Baker's going to be a second-round pick, and we'll see what happens.
Speaking of favorite players, a guy that you loved throughout the entirety of the draft season, you had an opportunity to speak with him, and he was at the Senior Bowl, and you also talked to him there.
Mm-hmm.
At number 19, Charles
Yes,
Omenihu, defensive lineman at Texas. I don't think this is too rich for me, but compared to some other boards out there, it probably is when you compare them all together. What do you like so much about Omenihu from Texas?
Well, to the people that don't listen to the podcast, and if you do stumble upon this podcast, or if you're in my mentions on Twitter at Russ NFL Draft, and you want to say that I'm simply here for the hot takes and the clickbait and everything else, you clearly, one, don't know me very well, and two, have not been paying attention. And if I was basing this off of what combines and pro days are, well, then my board would be DK Metcalf at 1, Brian Burns at 2. But as you can see, Metcalf's at 17, and Brian Burns is at 20. But Omenihu is sitting there at 19. And again, Charles Omenihu is a guy that getting to talk to him, getting to know who he is, and really getting an opportunity to feel out what kind of player he is and what kind of person he is, I'm more than comfortable with taking this guy in the first round because he's going to give you everything he has. And I don't think a lot of people realize this, but if I'm not mistaken, he outperformed Brian Burns on the year from a statistical standpoint. He had 9.5 sacks. And when you look at what Brian Burns did, he did not have 9.5 sacks. I'm trying to pull it up really fast because I didn't have it up. But, Charles Omenu's got this, well, he had 10 sacks, whatever, close enough. But with Omenu, he's complete, man. He shows a high motor. And that's something, too, is with defensive linemen. It's a position I coached for 6 years. And it was a position that I played for 3 years or 2.5 years in high school. And it's something that I've gone to Michigan State to listen to Ron Burton talk about. It's something I've gone to coaching clinics and listened to other defensive line coaches all across country talk about. And it's a position that I'm not saying it's like my position. Everybody views it differently, but I view it in a certain way. And I want guys that are, one, going to show me effort on film. And if you show me that effort, odds are you're showing that effort in practice. I don't get to see their practice habits every day, but I watched Omenu at the Senior Bowl, and I saw him firsthand, and I liked what I saw. And I liked that he checked in with a good body fit or good body size and body type. And again, the length really stands out. I like his versatility. I don't think you can play Brian Burns as a 4-eye. I think he's going to get owned. I think he's simply a guy that you're standing up off the edge and rushing the passer. I don't think he's going to help you in stopping the run every time. While he tested great and he checked in at 249, well, that worries me a little bit because he's never played at 249. Never in his career. He's never played at 249. And until he is in the stadium on Sunday on a scale taking a picture of 249 and proving to me that he's playing at 249, I'll never believe it. I truly believe he was playing at 230, 235 all season long. He put on 14 pounds. He is able to obviously test incredibly well at that, and it didn't slow him down. But there's so many concerns with Brian Burns for me that I have a first-round grade at him, but at 20, his tape is too inconsistent for me to not like Omenu a little bit more.
I remember, I guess, the coming days of the combine, there was rumors that Brian Burns would weigh in at like 225. And so even though he checks in, a little, sub 250, but then it was interesting because we've all talked about it, with the linebacker drills, because he worked out a little bit when, you have to drop back and catch footballs. He looked pretty natural there. So I think teams are going to have to figure out where they want him, but I don't want to say that's a red flag necessarily, but that's one more thing you have to think about. It's like, was he a pass rusher? Is he an edge guy that's going to drop back into coverage? And that may be too many questions that people want to answer with a first-round pick.
Yeah, and the thing, too, with Brian Burns is, like, I'm okay with if you're 15th and you're taking him in the first round at 15. But if you're sitting at 3 or 4, I'm sorry. I think you're making a really bold decision, and I think it's a big reach. And I think he's still incredibly raw off the edge. I don't think he's got, again, the work ethic that Omenu's got, and, tackles for loss. I just pulled it up. Omenu had 18. Brian Burns had 15. Burns had 10 sacks. Omenu had 9.5. But there was a lot of times on tape that you watched Omenu, he was a split second away from sacking a quarterback, and the quarterback got rid of the football. If he would have got there just that split second faster, he would have had 4 or 5 additional sacks to his resume. And I know I'm scouting the box score, but also with Brian Burns, if you go back and you watch the games, you watch him against Max Sharping against Northern Illinois. Didn't really do a whole lot. Played against Wake Forest.
My boy held him up.
Yeah, he didn't do a whole lot. You watch him against Jawan Taylor. He's getting powered and thrown around all day long. Now, did he make a couple of plays and make tackles and things? Sure, that happens. But when the majority of your tape is you getting blocked and getting turned, and the offensive lineman is showing grip strength and torque consistently on you, that's a problem to me. That shows me that you don't have the strength to hold your own off the edge and consistently set the edge. And when he does set the edge, he's not working his hands. He's simply full extension, locking out, and hoping that the play comes his way. Because if the play's not coming his way, he's not going to the ball. But against Wake Forest, I was very concerned with, and this game will always stay with me, despite 4 tackles and 2 sacks, this game sticks out because he could have made many of plays, but he didn't. And one of the reasons was work ethic, but the other reason was because he wasn't on the field. He was missing plays for 5, 6, 7 snaps in a row. And it just doesn't make sense. When you're a player like that with all this talent, why aren't you on the field? Is it an off-the-field thing? Was it him battling through injuries? Was it a weight issue? Or was it just they didn't know how to properly use him? There's so many different question marks to it that I just, and with Amenu and Brian Burns, it's legitimately like a 1.5 point difference on the grading scale, which is why I hate when, I'm not saying I hate your questions. I'm loving your questions. But like when people on Twitter get all up in arms over, well, that's wrong. And this, well, I'm going off of a grading scale. My grading scale is not perfect. And I've said that time and time again from last year to this year. I've only been grading players and putting it on a big board with like an official grade for 2 years. Like I've been doing this a long time, but not in a grading fashion. So that's just why I feel like my grading system is flawed, but I do trust myself when I'm watching players. And I think everybody else should trust me as well.
When you talk about the negatives of Brian Burns, like the Deion Jordan alerts just pop in my head.
Yes.
And I don't want to go that far because I think I like Burns a lot better than I did Deion Jordan, though that was years and years ago. But I think there's more of a bust factor with Burns based on, the fluctuating weight and then some of the motor issues and, overall, if there's a personality thing there. But anyways, you're talking about Charles Omenahu's size. He came in at the combine 6'5", 280, 36-inch arms, and at the Senior Bowl had an 84.5-inch wingspan, which is incredible. I mean, that's incredible length. And I think, like you said, there's a lot of versatility you can work with too.
Yeah, you can stand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say you can stand him up off the edge. You can play him as a 4-eye. You could legitimately play him as a 3 technique. You can play him as a 5. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do with Charles Omenu that you can't do with Brian Burns. And I just think that, any team in the top 20 that's looking for defensive line or even top 25 that's looking for defensive line help, he makes a lot of sense. And, whether it was, the Steelers at 20, if that was a player they would consider, I think he'd be a good fit there. Maybe the Panthers at 16, if Andre Dillard's off the board, if they don't like Cleveland Farrell with what's he battling right now? I think a toe injury.
Something like that, yeah.
If he's not on the board or if you're worried about that, maybe you just go Charles Omenu. So he won't necessarily give me the exact teams that he's been working out for and everything else, but I did drop that tweet at his pro day from, some of the teams that he met with. And it seems like the Colts are the team that have the most interest. So good for the Colts. They continue to draft good football players.
Oh yeah. That makes total sense. They need something to help work with them on the defensive line. One of the biggest surprises I have in your big board, and it's just based on what you've told me, Rashawn Gary at 31, but Chase Winovich, his teammate at Michigan, at 34.
I know
we've talked about both of these guys since September. But what's the, couple spot difference that you have Gary over Winovich?
The biggest thing was at the grading factor of it was Chase Winovich and the missing the combine, or not the combine, but the Senior Bowl and not being able to do a ton of work because of the shoulder injury. So I'm just, and that's why Jeffrey Simmons is at 21. The torn ACL. Jeffrey Simmons is a top 5 player in his class, but he's at 21 and he's getting a first-round grade. So there's 21 first-round grades. Jeff Simmons has got the last one, and it's simply because of the injuries. Chase Winovich, in reality, would actually be right around 29 or 30. So there would be a 1 or 2 spot difference in reality between Chase and Rashawn Gary. But just because of that shoulder and just how recent it's been, it worried me a little bit. But if I feel like if I'm faced with Rashawn Gary or Chase Winovich, I'm taking Chase. It would really depend on what I need, but if I really needed that edge rusher, I'm taking Chase Winovich. That's just how I feel.
So I'm looking over the wide receiver class, and we've talked about this too. It's probably a few months ago how it may not be, you may not see numerous wide receiver ones, though I think we kind of saw some when the numbers came out in the combine and watched some of the guys DK Metcalf, Hakeem Butler at 23, Metcalf at 17, and then N'Keal Harry at 28, which is a little higher than maybe some folks that you're used to looking at. Guy I want to ask you about, I guess I can ask you about Harry at 28, and then Kelvin Harmon, which I guess would be your wide receiver 4, comes in at 35. and that would be your second North Carolina State guy on the board. We'll get to Garrett Bradbury in just a little bit. But what about Harry and Harmon? Not too surprised that they're in your top 5 receivers, but maybe you're surprising some guys that they're in your top 40.
Well, I like this receiver group a lot, and I've made no secret about that. I think I've mentioned it quite a bit. It was really tough for me to grade these guys out, and it's even tougher as you get down the list to, through the 50s and the 60s and the 70s range. And you're like, man, you've got Andy Isabella here, you've got Emmanuel Hall, and you've got these, specific players, and you're like, you go through the grades, and you're like, sometimes I plug in a grade, and I'm like, is that even the right grade? It just sometimes it doesn't really meet. So I want to continue to revisit the grading scale and maybe find a better way and maybe rehash it out with Eric and see if hey, are we really going about this the right way? But as far as N'Keal Harry being at where he was at 28 and then Calvin Harmon at 35, these are guys that I think, are wide receiver 2s. I think they've got some upside to maybe reach the potential of a low tier wide receiver 1. But they N'Keal Harry just jumped out at the combine. And last year I didn't put a ton of stock into the combine. This year I'm changing it up a little bit to see if that will help with certain things. I had Calvin Ridley as my top receiver last year. Had I bought into the combine, I don't know if that necessarily would have changed his grade too much. But N'Keal Harry, I like his tape a lot. I like that he's utilized in the right way. I know there's been question marks on him as far as separation. I actually think he does a decent job at creating separation and getting off of press coverage at times, especially the further he goes downfield. So I think N'Keal Harry, even though he's got that 28th overall spot, I don't think he goes in round 1. There's a chance he does, but I think realistically he's probably a player that you would see somewhere in the second round, maybe Buffalo if he's there. Maybe he would be a player that they consider. And then Calvin Harmon, I can't, again, I put this on the combine and the pro days, and his combine wasn't great. We knew he didn't have the long speed, but it wasn't bad either. And that's I don't want to put too much into the combine and the pro day and everything else, but I am. And that's the thing that is worrying me about, that's the only thing that's worrying me about my grades. But I like these receivers a lot. And I like Calvin Harmon, his ability to get off press. I like his ability to show his catch radius. And I think he's just incredibly strong. He had 18 reps at the bench, but N'Keal Harry had 27. So these are just guys that I think can fit on the outside. They can fit in the slot. I like Harry because of his versatility. I think he can run block pretty well. And Harmon, I think, is a solid run blocker in his own right. I think he could probably play somewhat as a big slot at times, but more than likely he's going to match up on the outside, be a red zone threat. So I'm not saying I don't trust my grades, but when I got done with it and I was like, man, that's a lot of receivers up there. But then I thought about it and I'm like, I trust my film evaluation on it, and I trust that I like this group probably more than most. So I think these receivers are really good, and I think there's some chances for Hakeem Butler and DK Metcalf to be true number 1s in the league, like a Julio Jones or DeAndre Hopkins, and N'Keal Harry and Calvin Harmon could be like a Stephon Diggs, or maybe just maybe a Calvin Harmon could develop into like a Michael Thomas.
Yeah, and when you draft a receiver in the top 40, I think most teams would like to think they're drafting a wide receiver 1, but even if not, I don't think it's a reach that you're going to look at guys like Harry and Harmon. You're talking about Harry's numbers at the combine, just to reiterate, 6'2", 228. None of that is bad weight either. He's just throughout, kind of like a DK Metcalf frame, of course, not as intimidating. Yeah. 33-inch arms, 9.5-inch hands, ran a 4.53 at 228.62. That's incredible. Like you said, 27 reps on the bench press and a 38.5-inch vertical and a 10'2" broad jump. So he's definitely checks a lot of the boxes. And if there was any speed concerns, I think he definitely answered those in Indianapolis. The last guy I'm going to ask about, and I'll quit interrogating you and then you can interrogate me in just a little bit. But one of your favorite players that I've known, you've been talking about him ever since we saw each other in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, Garrett Bradbury. He is a center, but some teams may draft him for just interior offensive line purposes. What makes him so special?
He's a reach block machine, man. He's a player that fits so many offenses in the league today. And I liked Billy Price a lot last year. I liked Billy Price's ability to recover, reset, anchor. I thought he had a mean streak to him. I think Garrett Bradbury's got the same mean streak. I know he looks a little bit maxed out at his weight at probably, 6'3", 305. But I think Bradbury's a guy that, again, is a plug-and-play center or a plug-and-play guard. And I know that the Packers don't look at offensive line until normally the second day of the draft. But if they're considering an offensive lineman at all, I think at number 12, with, of course, the 12th player on my board, would make a lot of sense. One concern with Bradbury, I thought there was times that he didn't – I don't think there was times that he lowered his pad level enough. I thought there was times that he looked like the anchor, like he couldn't anchor because he was just limited in lower body strength. But when you just watch him play, he has this nasty side to him that I don't think – like you don't teach that. So there is a lot to like with Bradbury.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's a guy that, like I said, it's like I think a lot of people were surprised when he did weigh over 300 pounds at the Senior Bowl, because a lot of people kind of question what you were just talking about. It's like, well, was it a leverage issue, like a positioning issue, or was it just a lack of lower body strength? He had over 30 reps at the combine, so it wasn't necessarily a strength issue. I know you can accentuate, or you can talk about that more, highlighting his upper body than his lower body. But Garrett Bradbury, he's one of the cleanest players. I would say he and Dalton Reisner are probably two of my favorite offensive linemen in this class. And I do like a lot of the offensive linemen. Again, if you're listening to this for the first time, just go listen to every single episode. I'm going to talk about the trenches. And so I really like both of these guys. But Bradbury, a guy that's he started, I don't know how many games, numerous games at NC State. That dude's a stud, and I think he's a plug-and-play guy. And I don't think if a team drafts him in the top 15, I think he starts immediately, and I don't think anybody should bat an eye. They will because he's a center, but he's going to turn into an impact guy day one, similar to that of like Zach Martin or Quentin Nelson. I think he's that good of a player, and I think you do too.
Yeah, and I think Bradbury started, if I remember correctly, I believe he started 43 games for them at NC State. I mean, he's got a ton of experience. The guy is just like, it's when you have a player that's like that good, it's hard to like explain really how good he is. I'm trying to find out how many games he started. I'm sorry, but he had 34 reps in the bench. He tested really well at the combine. I mean, he looks the part of an NFL center, and I like that. He's constantly moving. That's something you don't see with offensive linemen very often. You see guys that maybe take a play off here or there. Now he's got short arms. He's going to struggle with creating separation. He's going to consistently have guys in his chest plate, which is why there are times, and it happened to him a lot in Mobile, and I don't care what anybody says. There were times that he got beat, blew up, and he lost leverage, and he was losing ground, but he was able to recover a lot of the time. And he was able to reset, lower his pad level, and just roll his hips and continue to move. He's a phenomenal player. I mean, that's like really the only way you can chop it up and slice it. And like when you have a player he's that good and you don't have a ton of weaknesses, it's like I don't really know how. Like I don't know what else to pivot to other than the fact that you're going to get this guy and you're going to draft him and you're going to start him right away. I mean, there's no other way around it. So when you have Billy Price, Frank Ragnow going in the first round last year, I think Garrett Bradbury is most definitely going in the first round this year.
Yeah, I definitely agree too. And if not, he's going to be one of the first selections on day 2. But that's it I have for the big board questions. I hope I didn't drill you that hard. But if you're listening to this and you have not looked at Russell's big board yet, you can find it. Is it only on Twitter right now?
Yeah,
the graphic on your page?
Yeah, it's only on Twitter. It's pinned on the top of the page at Russ NFL Draft. It actually got quite a bit of buzz, and I'm willing to go a little bit more into detail. So if you're part of CoverOne.net, you're a premium member, you want more questions, go to the Slack channel and just send me a message or notify me and say, hey, what's going on with this? Why do you have this guy there? And I'll go in a little bit more detail. And don't ask me why we did a top 40 and then a top, 160. I know why we did 160 because I get to that point and then I'm like, I'm done. I'm not watching anymore. Between a full-time job, doing this basically full-time outside of work and ignoring my wife for many, many hours, it just does not always fly. So I get to 150, 155, and I'm like, all right, I'll get 5 more prospects done, and then I'm done. And that's what I did last year. So we set it at that. And then when Aaron Quinn and I were working through the big board last year and just working on a graphic, it was pretty much, hey, let's do 8 players on this side, 8 on the, we came up with 40, and that's what looked best on the template. So I'm willing to answer pretty much any question. If you don't like players, I really don't care. That's just how I view it, and that's how they grade it out on my board. I really can't believe we're at this point. I can't believe the other day I dropped the big board. It's just 10 months have gone by and we've got 16 days until the draft and then that's it. So to everybody that's been, blowing up the tweet on it, that I'm surprised it did, especially just on a Sunday afternoon. Thank you for the support. Thank you for being negative if you have been. Check it out. It's good stuff. But also something you need to check out is the study of the running back longevity, draft selections, and usage. And this is something that CP wrote most recently on CoverOne.net. You guys can check that out. And it's really just going on to the history of running backs. And it's got the percentage of rookie rushing yards by team the last 5 years, not percentage, but the rank for rookie running backs just over the last 5 years. The Chargers are number 1. The Giants are number 2. The Ravens are number 3. The Lions are 4th. And then the Redskins are 5. There's so much in this that is just totally worth a premium subscription that CP wrote. It's incredible. But let me ask you, what made you think of doing an article like this?
Oh, wow. Kind of in the introduction, I explained it because it seems like every single year, it was more over last year with Saquon Barkley, being pretty much the consensus number 1 or number 2 player in the draft. And it's well, where should they take them? Or where should they take him? And then, you're looking at, New York. Should they take their quarterback? Should they take a running back? Because running backs don't fare this well in the first round or this yada, yada, yada. So I just wanted to put a bunch of data together that can kind of help accentuate somebody's point, whether in a positive or negative way, so everybody doesn't have to be like, oh, yeah, well, this guy did this. Yeah, but this guy didn't do it, and they were drafted in the same position. So I kind of threw it all together. It took me a lot of time, but there's a lot of numbers there. I'm not going to run through them all because it will just sound like a bunch of hogwash because unless you see it in front of you, it's hard to really compare all the analytics and data. But, yeah, it was just something that it's been on my mind for a while. And even though there's not going to be – I don't think there's going to be a first-round running back. I mean, maybe Josh Jacobs. I know he tested a little better in Alabama's second pro day. And so maybe there will be an opportunity for a running back to be selected later on. But I think just kind of, culminating over Ezekiel Elliott and guys even going back to Todd Gurley, even Trent Richardson, who obviously is one of the, the notorious bust guy as far as running backs go early on. So I went through, the usage of rookies and how the impact or how much impact they can provide in year one. So I think that kind of gives you an example of why some guys that may not have numerous amounts of attempts and playing time in college, but they're jumping ship early, kind of like an Elijah Holyfield, who was the second string guy at Georgia. I briefly talked about him, but the usage over the running backs as far as rookies go has been a steady climb. We started at 14.5% of the rushing yards in the NFL were by rookies in 2014, and in 2018, 16.6%. were by rookies. And I know that doesn't sound like a huge difference, but it shows that there are, one, a lot more talented guys making that jump to the NFL as rookies. But it sounds like there's more just opportunities in general. Because even from 2016, the rookie yards total in the NFL was 8,300. And in 2017 was 9,600. So we're seeing a lot more opportunities for these guys. Also, being more of a third down back too also helps. But you definitely check that out, cover1.net. Again, I'm not going to run through every number because I probably sound like I'm already rambling now with a bunch of numbers that people are going to have to look up anyway. So definitely check that out on cover1.net.
Yeah, I mean, guys, this is freaking phenomenal. I mean, that's really the only way to explain it. There is so much information here, and it's good information. It's not like information like, oh, I don't really need that. But I mean, you went all the way back to 92. I don't even know if were you born in 92?
I wasn't. I'm a 94 kid. So
see,
this was a few guys that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember watching them at the end of their career.
Yeah, dude. You've got Vaughn Dunbar from the Saints in here, who played 39 games. He played 2 years with the Saints, 3 years in the league. And then it's just got average production for running backs by round, which is important. If your team takes a first round running back between 2009 and 2013, here's what their average yearly production was by round. In the first round, they averaged 154 carries, 649 yards, and 4 touchdowns, compared to in the fifth round where there was 71 carries for 296 yards and 1 touchdown. So the later the rounds, the lower the production. And that pretty much probably goes for a lot of positions, but especially the running back position. So if your team drafts a 5th or 6th round running back, don't get too excited about it because it could lead to good success, but there's a chance that it doesn't. And more times than not, especially off the average, it's not going to lead to a lot. So you need to check this out. Who was, and maybe you won't remember this, but out of all the running backs that you researched for this, give me the best running back that you came across. I know you went all the way back to 92, so have fun here. Who's the best running back that you came across, but then who is your favorite running back?
Okay, so I went back to 1992 with the first round running back. So I think one of the guys, and kind of made it a little bit of a headache because there's not a crazy amount of guys that were drafted in 2007 that are still playing as far as first round running backs go. But there's 2 that were picked in the first round. That's Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch. And both of the guys, especially Peterson, played 10 years with the Vikings. He's going into his 13th year. He signed another 1 or 2 year deal with Washington. Guy's played over 100, or he's going to play over 150 games in his career. And the guy's he tore his ACL and comes back even better than ever. So he's one of the guys that definitely caught my eye as probably a favorite and really is one of the best guys. And there are some other guys like LT. So when you're going from 92 all the way to, most recently last year, and I didn't take too much into account of the numbers from a year ago because it doesn't really give you any sample size. But yeah, going to, just looking at some of the first round guys, I would say probably my favorites would be, of course, 2 Hall of Famers, LaDainian Tomlinson, who already is in the Hall of Fame, and a future Hall of Famer, and Adrian Peterson. But there are some surprises in here. Some guys, I'll let people, figure out who they are, but there are some surprises in here. It's like, oh, I didn't realize he played that long. Or, I didn't realize, Stephon Ridley was still in the league. Or, Tywan Jones is still in the league or something like that.
Right.
So there's a lot of surprises that you can definitely look at. But just concerning first-round running backs, I have a table put together, again, since 1992. Years with the team that drafted them, years total in the league, games with that team that drafted them, and then total games in their entirety. So that's definitely something to check out because it's one thing that the longevity of the running backs in question, but it's also, what's the average or the percentage of the guys getting to that second contract with the team? Because it's like, so what? You draft a first-round running back, but is he still going to be on your team in year 5, year 6? And the numbers don't add up. So even if you feel like you hit a home run in that first, that first wave of contract with that running back, don't get your hopes up quite yet until you see him really stay on that second contract for a year or 2.
Yeah, and that's something too. Again, guys, there's so much information in here. It's incredible. First-round running backs from 92 to 2012, the average amount of time that they spent with the team that drafted him was 5 years, and their average time in the league was 6.8 years, in 64 games with the team that drafted them, and average games in the NFL just under 89 games. So, like, if you're drafting a running back in the first round, the average is pretty much 64 games for that amount of time after you drafted him, 5 years with you, and then he's going to go sign with somebody else, maybe last 2 years there, and maybe play, 2 seasons of 12 games each. So, like, man, there's names in here that I can't even I can't even remember. Like, I remember them playing, and it's like, man, like I totally forgot about this guy. Like Larry Johnson, for example, was drafted.
Right, he was one of the guys that surprised me too.
Yeah, like he was drafted 27th overall by the Chiefs in 2003. He played, and this has surprised me a little bit, he played 85 career games. And I remember when he got drafted, I was like, man, like this guy's going to be like amazing, because obviously like I live in Big Ten country, so like I'm watching a guy from Penn State. He's dominating. He comes in the league. He's got, 2 solid years in front of him, and then he just gets hurt, and he's not able to stay healthy after that. But, man, just so much good stuff. This took you, like, what? You said a while, right?
Well, I started on it, I think, before I went to the Senior Bowl. And, of course, when everything started unfolding and everything like that, I'll tell you the longest part, though, was when breaking down the usage from the past 5 years by team. Because you got to go up and add up all the rushing yards and then the rushing yards, then find that percentage. I did that before the Senior Bowl. The rest of the stuff didn't take me too long, but it's definitely been a work in progress for sure.
It's great stuff, man. Really good job with it. You did awesome.
I appreciate that so much.
Yes, absolutely. And you guys, of course, can check this out again over at cover1.net, or you can download the Cover One app simply in the App Store on iTunes or in Google Play. Very simple. Search Cover One. You find it, you download it, and you love it. You have all of our content on your handheld device all the time. Get those push notifications. So when you get these in-depth articles on running backs and quarterbacks and offensive linemen and everything else, you will have it right there in your hands. And then, of course, every time we drop a podcast, which as of right now has pretty much been almost every single day, Monday through Wednesday, you guys will get that as well. So, again, check it out with the Cover One app. You guys can follow CP on Twitter at _Christian Page. You can follow me at Russ NFL Draft. I don't have much else on the running backs. I don't know if there's anything else as far as the big board goes. Again, you guys can check that out on Twitter. It's pinned at the top of my page at Russ NFL Draft. And there will be an article coming on that. But, CP, you got anything else for us?
I think that's it. The only thing I'm working on right now, which it doesn't take as much research as the previous thing is just kind of working on, and though I think quarterback wins as a starter can be overrated at times, but I'm working on that just to get some like reference numbers there, some fumble rates and, starts for offensive linemen, and then the overall touches for running backs, which Myles Gaskin has 1,000 touches entering the 2019 NFL Draft, which is incredible. So he's already shaken up a little bit this past year. So it'll be interesting to see. But that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
If he could only test well.
Right. I mean, there was a lot of things going for him going into the 2018 college football season. But, yeah.
Let down.
We'll see.
Yeah, he let me down. But, all right, I'll start rambling about other players. We got to get out of here. So, folks, thanks for joining us on a Tuesday night. For CP, I'm Russell Brown. This is Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.